all our Jewish Historical Society members, our guests, and especially the members of Temple Sholom. So glad to see that you've come to this program. And our distinguished guest speaker, Rabbi Jaech. I learned how to pronounce it. My name is Gail Gruber-Trell. I'm from Stanford, and I'm also the president of the Jewish Historical Society of Lower Fairfield County. And because we are Lower Fairfield County, we decided we needed to spread out and have our meetings in Lower Fairfield County. So we were so pleased that Temple Sholom has opened up their beautiful temple, their beautiful social hall, so that we could have our meeting. And it wasn't too hard to get to, even though I passed the entrance once. Out of respect for the speaker and the audience, if you have a cell phone, I'm just reminding you to turn it down or off, which reminds me I have to do mine. So thank you very much for having us. This handout, if you picked it up or if I gave it to you, is a very, very important piece of material for you to learn about what's happening at JHS. All our activities, where to go, where to find them, and what's happening. And the other thing that's happening, so I really want you to study it, and there'll be a short test after the meeting, because it tells all about our library, all about our archives, our next program in February, how to join the society if you're not already a member, and we also have some envelopes to make it really easy for you. We have a wish list on this paper, all the things that we would need from members or potential members. And one of the things that's not listed here is oral history. We're setting up a committee to begin doing oral histories, which had been done in the past, but we are going to do them again to create a library of information about people who lived and have a lot of stories to tell. So we'd like to have a bigger committee. So if you're interested in doing an oral history for someone, we would love to have you join us. And there's contact numbers on here, how to reach us. There's going to be no excuse for you not to reach us. There's writing us a letter, there's a telephone number, there's email, and we also have a website. So you can find us. And if you have any questions, the people who are wearing badges are our board members, and you can ask them anything that you might need to know. If they don't know the answer, they'll find the answer for you. So please, let's begin to grow. So you also received our book talk list of what's happening this Wednesday. There's a book talk in Stanford at the JCC, and it's the Yiddish Policemen's Union. We have someone discussing that, and he's even here in the audience right now. Ernest Fenwick will be leading that conversation. We have a book that was given to us to sell. It's from a woman who's lived in Stanford, grew up in Stanford, was educated in Stanford, and moved to Israel. Her whole family made Aliyah. Her son was killed, and I'm not quite sure because I haven't read the book yet, in Israel, and she wrote a book about him. It's called The Smile of Courage, My Son, My Soldier. And she had the book for sale at $18, and today it's on sale with us for $15, and the money goes directly to our library. So we have a few copies. If anyone is interested, see me later. Okay, book, and in the handout. I just want to make sure I've done everything before I introduce our speaker. Okay, thank you, and I'm going to introduce Ava Weller, who will introduce our speaker.
Good morning, Happy New Year, 2008, and we're very grateful that the weather is with us this morning, unlike December's meeting date. So I wanted to start with thanking Temple Sholom for having us and for their generous donation of the food. And I wanted to thank Neil Hershkowitz for setting that up, and Cantor Sklar here at Temple Sholom. That's really appreciate your generosity, and it's nice to be here. I wanted to let you know that our speaker for next month is going to be Lou Sabini, who we were going to have in December, and will be at Temple Aguda Shalom, which is where we were originally going to be in December. So I'm just going to tell you a little bit about him for those of you who may not know him, and I hope he'll join us. Lou Sabini will present a filmic view of bigotry in America and will screen during the program an 11-minute 1945 Academy Award-winning short subject film titled The House I Live In, starring Frank Sinatra. The film's subject of anti-Semitism reflects the bigotry of the period. Lou will also give some historical background on the making of the film, along with biographical information about its director, Mervyn LeRoy, a Jewish filmmaker who addressed many social issues. So that's a little unusual. We don't usually show a film, but it should be a very interesting program. And now I will introduce you to Rabbi Jennifer Jaech. She became the new senior rabbi in 2006 of Temple Israel of Northern Westchester, and she leads both the ritual and the educational life of the congregation. She served Temple Israel as a rabbinical intern since 1999 and as assistant rabbi since 2003. Rabbi Jaech received ordination from Hebrew Union College, Jewish Institute of Religion in 2003, earned a Master of Arts in Hebrew Literature from HUCJIR in 2002, and a Bachelor of Arts from the Evergreen State College in 1985. Prior to coming to Temple Israel, Rabbi Jaech worked in higher education administration, government relations, and politics. And she will now share her story of how a Lutheran girl from Richland, Washington, became a rabbi and spiritual leader for her congregation. So we welcome her. And
thank you, Ava, and thank you for being here this morning. I plan to speak informally, because after all, I'm speaking about my life, and if I need too many notes about that, then I'm really in trouble. And if I say something that seems unclear or confusing, please don't hesitate to raise your hand and ask for clarification. And I will also leave time at the end for some questions, if you'd like me to go into any more detail about something that I've said. I'm not surprised that Gail had a hard time with my last name, because most people look at my last name spelled Jaech, and they have no idea how to pronounce it. And I recently learned that it's because originally it comes from the German. Whoops. The German and pronounced J, or spelled J-A umlaut, C-H. And I learned that it was originally pronounced Jaech. So I'm grateful that that pronunciation didn't carry over into the American pronunciation. J-A-K-E is much easier to remember that that's how it's pronounced. I wanted to mention my German background, or at least my German heritage, as a starting point to let you know that I come from a long line of members of the Lutheran Church. And both my mother's side of the family and my father's side of the family. My father's side of the family has even ministers, pastors in lineage. My great-grandfather was a Lutheran minister. Two of his sons were Lutheran ministers. And in fact, I have I think it's a first cousin once removed who is currently serving as a Lutheran minister. So becoming a pastor of a congregation is a family business in a way, although I certainly took it in a bit of a different direction. My father when he was growing up, it was made clear to him that he must marry another member of the Lutheran Church, and not just any stream of the Lutheran Church, the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod. So he didn't have a lot of potential prospects for mates, but it turns out that he did marry my mother, who had grown up in the same church as he, and it never occurred to either one of them, I think, that they would marry outside of that church. I wanted to mention this at the beginning just to contrast it with a recent experience I had. I recently took a family vacation to California. I have 5 brothers, and 2 of them live in California. And first I visited my brother in Los Angeles, and I walked into his bedroom and was kind of startled to see hanging on the wall clearly a Catholic image of Jesus. And this is something that Lutherans would never have put up on their wall, because one of the things that Lutherans taught growing up is that the Catholics were essentially idolaters because of all of the images that they had in their worship. So I was surprised, and I asked my brother about it, and he said, well, he has a new wife, and she's from Thailand, and she's Catholic, but not just any kind of Catholic. She also believes in kind of the ghost world too. That's what she took from her native Thailand. So she practices kind of a strange, not strange to her, I guess, but new to me kind of religion. I then, after visiting my brother in Los Angeles, went to Fresno, California, where my oldest brother there is married to a very devout member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. So I have 2 nephews and 1 niece who are devout Mormons. My brother is not a practicing Mormon. And as I was visiting them, in fact, my middle nephew received his mission call. Mormon young men go for 2 years on a mission. They're assigned to some part of the world. And I was there when that announcement came. And it struck me that my generation, when I look at my brothers and their religious paths, none of us followed the same religious path as our parents followed. And I'm going to talk a little bit at the end of my talk why I think that's significant, because I think it's not so unusual now for one generation, my generation, to break away from the religion of their parents. And that's certainly something that we in the Jewish community have to think about and take seriously. But it only took one generation for that shift to take place. And I saw it so dramatically illustrated in California recently. So I guess I'll begin with telling you a little bit about my early childhood and religious upbringing. My childhood home is a place called Richland, and it's in Washington State. And it has a bit of an unusual history in that prior to World War II, it really didn't exist except as a very, very tiny farming community in eastern Washington State, which is a high desert area. But in World War II, the federal government came in and evicted all of the farmers from the land and began to build what would become plants to produce the nuclear material used for the Nagasaki bomb. So it was and then after World War II ended, the scientific community remained, and the attention was turned to peacetime uses of manufacturing this nuclear material. But the town had that flavor. So there were a few Jewish scientists who were present in Richland, which was unusual for Eastern Washington, which was, I doubt there was a Jewish presence at least within 200 miles of my hometown. The Jews of Richland had a tiny synagogue, and it's still there. I visited it my last trip to Richland, and it's right down the street from the Lutheran church in which I was raised. I only had one encounter with Judaism in my early religious upbringing when I visited, along with the members of my Brownie Girl Scout troop, this tiny synagogue. And I have a very distinct memory that a man, and I'm sure he wasn't a rabbi because I'm sure they couldn't afford a rabbi, but a man met our troop. I can't remember what he talked about, but I remember that he took the Sefer Torah from the Ark. And that made such an impression on me. I'll never forget the sound and the sight of that Sefer Torah as he showed it to us. Beyond that, I really didn't hear much about Jews or Judaism growing up. As I mentioned, I heard much more about Catholics and why the Catholics were wrong in my Lutheran upbringing. My family was very devout. Their social life centered, my parents' social life centered around the church. Every night we had what we called devotions around our family table, which usually included a bit of Bible study targeted to young kids and some prayer. And when I think about what I took from my early childhood experience religiously, I took a couple of very positive things. First, I really had a sense of community because my parents were so involved in the church and so active in the church. And even more important, I think, and significant in terms of where I am right now, I had very extensive exposure to what I call the Hebrew Scriptures, the Tanakh, what I call growing up the Old Testament. And the reason is that Martin Luther taught that it was up to every Christian to really go back to the sources, rather than taking the approach to Bible study that the Catholic Church might take and say, we learn Bible through the lens and through the interpretation of the church. Lutherans took a different approach and said, we're going to study the Bible directly on our own. And I loved learning the stories in what I call then the Old Testament, and had great exposure and deep exposure to these stories. And in fact, many, many years later, when I was a first-year rabbinical student, I was kind of surprised to learn that of all of my classmates, I seemed to have the most familiarity with the stories of the Hebrew Scriptures, just from my early upbringing. And this is what never really stuck with me from my earliest age was the theology of the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod. And it would be unfair of me to not, I guess, have a disclaimer to say that this is, I think that every church probably has a different flavor depending on how the minister or the pastor of that church teaches. And also, my Lutheran church was a member of the Missouri Synod, which is the most conservative of all of the synods or the streams of Lutheranism. So I don't want to say that my experience is the experience of today, universally applied across the world of Lutherans. But I remember kind of having a deep sense that what we were taught wasn't fair. Let me tell you about that. First of all, it was clear that women were not involved at all in the leadership of churches. And I noticed that as the only girl in a family of all boys. because I didn't feel discriminated against at home particularly, but I did in the church. But even worse than that, in my young mind, was what I was taught about the fate of people who didn't believe the way that Lutherans were taught to believe. I was taught that you really had to believe a certain way about Jesus and the way we live in this world. And if you didn't believe that certain way and have the right amount of faith, you were doomed to eternal damnation. Now, for some reason, the pastor of my childhood church loved to talk about eternal damnation. In fact, my parents used to joke that almost all of his sermons were about hell. And eventually, even if he didn't start off talking about hell, his sermon would end up with hell. And it was a bit of a joke, but in a way it wasn't a joke, because I would ask the natural question, well, what happens if you are a really good person and you live your whole life helping people, but you live on the other side of the world and you've never even heard about this fellow Jesus? I wouldn't say fellow Jesus, but you've never heard about God or about Jesus. Is that person going to go to hell? And the answer was, well, yes. Yes, that person's going to go to hell because the person doesn't believe in the right way. And of course, the other side of that hypothetical situation is that what if you're a terrible person and you live your whole life taking advantage of others and hurting others, and then on your deathbed you suddenly have the conversion and you believe the right way? Does that get you into heaven? And the answer was yes. And somehow that just didn't seem fair or right to me. I could never believe that way, which was worrisome because proper belief was the only path to salvation. In the Lutheran church of my upbringing, I was taught that you can do nothing to save yourself. Your salvation depends entirely on what you believe. And I have to say that was so big in turning me away from Lutheranism. And it's one of the things that I embraced about Judaism is the fact that action is really more important than any theological test. But I guess in a way I should thank my early religious upbringing for moving me in that direction. Just one little illustration about the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod. You might be familiar with in the aftermath of September 11th, there was an ecumenical service held at Yankee Stadium. I don't know if you remember that, and the people of all faiths came together. Jews and Catholics and Protestants and Muslims came together. The member of the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod who participated in that service was censured for appearing with people of other faiths, because the particular brand of Lutheranism is so rigid in terms of doctrine and what it teaches. Okay, so even at the beginning, I knew that I didn't have the right stuff to be a good member of the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod, but my mother was really the glue, the religious glue of our family. My mother was diagnosed before I was born with a rare form of cancer, a cancer of the sinuses. So throughout my childhood, she was in and out of treatment, and her faith was very strong. And I guess that's why, even as a child, I continued to go to Sunday school without protest. But she had very strong faith, and she always believed that she would be healed of her cancer. And when it became clear that she wasn't going to be healed, her greatest concern was that her children not lose their faith because of her death. Now, it's interesting, I only recently learned that my mother, despite being a devout member of the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod her whole life, towards the end of her life, started to look to other ways of thinking. I guess in her attempt to find healing or find relief. And she even went to a faith healer at one point, and I only recently learned that out. So when I think about knowing that she was so concerned about what would happen to her children after she died, I hope that she gained a little bit more perspective and a broader religious view before she died, because I would want her to be proud of me today. When she did die, our family just lost its center, and my relationship with the church, it had already started to erode before her death, but that really unraveled my relationship with the church. And especially when I have a memory of being at her memorial service. I was 10 years old, and the memorial service said nothing about her. It didn't acknowledge the loss to the family. I don't even remember if her name was said. It might have been said once. But the tone of the memorial service was, we need to be happy. This is a happy time because now your mother is in heaven. And somehow that just felt so false to me. And after that, there was really no turning back. I did get confirmed in the Lutheran Church, meaning that at the age of 13, I stood in front of the congregation and answered questions from Luther's small catechism to the satisfaction of the congregation, and then took a vow to be a member of the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod my whole life. And I have to say that every year during the High Holy Days, when we sing the Kol Nidre, I think about that vow I took, the vow that I just couldn't keep, and even at the time I took it, I knew that I couldn't keep it, but I was too much of a chicken to back out of my confirmation. I went to an alternative college. I graduated high school, went to an alternative college in Washington State. And at that time, I was essentially, had no truck with organized religion of any kind. I wanted nothing to do with it. And I was reading lots of Marx and Freud, and kind of figuring out that God was either a tool for keeping the masses oppressed, or God was simply a projection of our infantile fantasies. So I was really done with religion at that time. But at the same time, this alternative college I went to, the Evergreen State College, had a large number of Jewish students and Jewish faculty there. And the reason is that Evergreen is one of the experimental colleges from the 1960s, and it's one of the few that has really survived and thrived in its differences because it's publicly funded and supported by the state of Washington. And I knew that I had to go to a state school. That was the one I wanted to go to, and it was the only state school that had large numbers of kids, many of them Jewish, coming from the East Coast because they were attracted by Evergreen's innovative approach to education. I made a number of Jewish friends while I was at Evergreen, and it was my first real exposure to the Jewish people, and I felt completely at home with other Jews, and I had no reason for even thinking about why this might be so. I had no way to explain why I felt so at home with my Jewish friends, but I understood Jewish humor right away. I remember watching, I think it's Annie Hall, the Woody Allen movie, where Annie Hall orders pastrami and mayonnaise or something like that on white bread, and I understood why that was funny. And I was watching it with a Jewish friend, and she turned to me and said, "How do you know why that's funny?" but somehow I did. It turned out that through my, I guess, attraction to Jewish people, I became involved with a Jewish man, and we became serious about each other. And he, even though he himself was not terribly religious, he was a member. When you live in a minority, and out west Jews are really a minority in most places, when you live in a minority community, such a minority community, Jews join synagogues even if you're not religious, because that's your only connection to Jewish community. So he was a member of the local synagogue, and he said, as we were getting serious about a future together, he said, I just have one thing, to ask you. He said, I don't want you to convert for the sake of marriage. And I said, well, that's good, because I don't believe in religion at all. But he said, if we have any children, I would like them to be raised as Jews. That's very important. And I said, well, I don't really know much about Judaism. What does it mean to be Jewish? So it so happens that Bob, his name is Bob, had grown up at Temple Israel of Northern Westchester, where I'm now the rabbi. And he had been greatly influenced by Rabbi Michael Robinson, Alav HaSholom, who for many years led Temple Israel and was at the forefront, really, of the fight for social justice. He was very active in the civil rights movement and outspoken about the Vietnam War. He turned Temple Israel into a sanctuary for people who who wanted to resist the draft. He was very outspoken in terms of social justice. And so Bob, my former husband, said to me at the time, well, Judaism is really about caring about people who are oppressed and working for justice in the world. In one sentence, he said that's what Judaism was. And I said, well, okay, of all of the organized religions, I guess that one seems least objectionable to me. So I agreed to raise, we have one son, our son as a Jew, without really knowing what that meant in any serious way. Our son was born. We were living in Olympia, Washington, where I went to school, and there wasn't a mohel anywhere nearby, so he was circumcised in the hospital. He had a naming ceremony in the synagogue, and then for about 3 years, we didn't really do much Jewishly at all, except we would tell him that he was Jewish. So one day he asked me 3 questions in a row. He said, Mommy, who is God, and why am I Jewish, and what is Jewish? And I faked my way through the answer to the first question by saying, well, I think God is kind of like the Force in Star Wars, because I knew that he understood, he'd seen Star Wars, and he understood that. But I had no idea about the second 2 questions, about being Jewish and what does it mean to be Jewish. And fortunately, he had gone on to another topic, so I didn't have to come up with something right then. But I went to the local rabbi in town in Olympia, Washington. Olympia at that time had one synagogue, and it was served by a female rabbi, ordained by the Reconstructionist movement. And the people who came to the synagogue ranged from my son's father, who's pretty much a secular Jew but wanted a connection to Jewish community, to people who had been raised Orthodox. So you can imagine it's kind of an impossible synagogue in which to be a rabbi. And she used to say that had that synagogue been plunked down in New York, it would have scattered. Members would have found other synagogues. But she was a good rabbi, and she, in the good Reconstructionist way, she gave me lots of material to learn, on my own. And she said, if you're serious about it too, you should, try some of the rituals. It might seem strange to light the Shabbat candles at first, but you agreed to raise a Jewish child, and this is an important ritual. Do it, and the more you do it, the more natural it will feel. So I left the synagogue that day with an armload of books, and I sat down to read. I was always very good about doing my homework. And almost immediately, I had this sense that I had somehow come home. And I can't explain it, but it was a physical feeling that I had found my place. And I felt it so strongly that I never questioned it. But at the same time, I was afraid to say anything to anybody because I thought they would think I was strange. You know, who was I? I didn't know anything, and you know, how would I say that I have the chutzpah? You know, to say that I'm a Jew. You know, I really feel it that way in my soul. So it took me a few weeks to work up the courage to tell my rabbi at the time that this is how I was feeling. And her reaction, I think, was so critically important. She, of course, had been welcoming at the beginning and encouraging of me to learn more about Judaism, to keep up keep my promise to raise a Jewish child. She had never did I feel a sense that I shouldn't be there. She was very welcoming. And she also was so supportive and warm when I told her how I felt. No, she was not judgmental in the least, and I really credit her with being so important in my Jewish journey. She said, she had something very practical to say. She said, live as a Jew for a year, learn to read Hebrew, come to services, practice Judaism, and then in a year we'll talk and we'll decide what to do next formally. So a year later, I converted, and I became very active in my congregation, serving on the board. And the thought of becoming a rabbi came to me at the time when I was considering. I had one of those moments when I kind of projected myself into the future. What do I mean? At the time I was working had worked for the state legislature, for the Senate Democrats, and then I had kind of doing policy work during the day and running campaigns at night. And then I went to work at Evergreen doing administration and also doing government relations, being the link between the legislature, the primary source of funding for Evergreen, and the college. And I had one of those moments where I said, okay, in 10 years, if I stay on this path, where will I be? And I thought, okay, so maybe I would be one of the top people at an agency in Washington, certainly doing public service or something like that. Is that really what I want to be? And then I thought, what gives me joy and fulfillment in my life? And it really was synagogue life. It was my work with the synagogue as a volunteer. So in a moment, I just said, what if I became a rabbi? And I had that same physical feeling that, yes, this is what I was meant to do, whatever that means. Now, of course, I had that feeling, and just as I had that feeling about my conversion, it took me a long time to reveal that to anybody else, and it took me a long time to work up the nerve in my mind to apply to rabbinic school. I felt like because I was coming as a Jew by choice, I needed to really know my Hebrew, really know my history. I needed to be better prepared than anybody else because I was coming with a disadvantage. So it took me a long time to prepare to apply to HUC and to work up the nerve to finally apply. So that's how I came to the rabbinate. And I think in advertising this talk, I was supposed to say something about how my journey might reflect or teach us something about Judaism today, or the challenges of Reform and conservative Judaism today. I might be formally called a Jew by choice, because I underwent a formal conversion to Judaism. But it seems to me that in today's American society, and this maybe has been true since political emancipation of the Jews, we are all Jews by choice, because we do not have to choose, we don't have to demonstrate Jewishness in any way as Americans. American Jews choose whether they want to be Jewish, and they choose how they want to be Jewish. And children clearly do not feel obligated, after the time they've grown, to follow the same religion that their parents followed. And I started out talking about my brothers and their different religious paths. So it's not just within the Jewish community. I really see this in my generation today. People want to kind of make their own way, religiously speaking, in the world. And I think this is a big challenge for the central institution of Judaism, the synagogue, because no longer do people feel a sense of obligation to join a synagogue. I imagine it was not that long ago when maybe anti-Semitism was more prevalent, or there was not as much assimilation. People didn't really think about joining a synagogue. It was just something that you did. You joined a synagogue, you supported a synagogue. I don't see that with my generation and then the younger, the people who follow me. I think now people join synagogues, for the most part, to meet specific needs, whether it be their own spiritual search, or in the case of younger people, they join to get a religious education for their children so that their kids can be bar mitzvahed, in some way. I think there's a danger. I think synagogues have had to respond to this fact of life by trying to be creative in marketing and figuring out how to increase membership, because membership is the most important thing to be able to pay the bills. But there's a danger in doing that, because there's a danger in viewing ourselves as part of the marketplace, because we don't want to buy into the notion that we exist to provide services for a certain fee, for a membership fee. And I think I hope that the better way for synagogues, given this new phenomenon, is to really concentrate on strengthening our core of who we are. I think the synagogue is a Kehila Kadosha, a sacred community, and if synagogues focus on that central mission, I am hoping that others will be drawn into it, because certainly that was my experience. I never thought that as an atheist, somebody who really had rejected religion, I never thought that religion could be a source of meaning and purpose for my life, and it is. So I'm hoping that if synagogues really focus on that, on being relevant and on being a source of community and meaning and purpose, that the marketing problem will take care of itself. That's my hope. I don't know if it will be the reality. And I guess finally, I hope that I'm here today and serving a Jewish community. I know I do it with great enthusiasm and coming to it by choice, and I hope that my example can show others that there's a way back into religious life, and that my enthusiasm is contagious, my enthusiasm for Judaism. So that's all that I wanted to say. That's my story in its broad outline, and I'm happy now to answer any specific questions that you might have, if you would like to hear more. Yes, Gail.
First question is how your family felt about your becoming a rabbi.
Okay. Well, if my mother had been alive, it might have been a different story, and I might not have even become Jewish or a rabbi. I think the big shock for them was my conversion, and I wasn't so worried about my brothers because, you know, anything goes with them. But I was worried about my father, and it so happened that at that time my father was married to a woman whose own father was a fundamentalist Christian preacher, and I was a little bit worried about how the two of them would take the news. It turns out that my former stepmother, Alice, really, when I told the news, my father kind of looked at her to see what her reaction would be, and she said, "I am so glad," she said to me, "I'm so glad that you've returned to a religious community, a religious faith, and that you're giving that to your son. That's the most important thing." And then my dad, having heard those words, said it was okay with him. Now my dad is proud. He's interestingly, he does not belong to any church at the moment. He's proud of my path, and I think he reads my sermons on the internet now and then. And my brothers, I think they don't understand me, but they don't judge me because they too have gone their own ways religiously. So that wasn't a factor for me, fortunately. Yes. Yeah.
Why did your father break away from the church?
I wonder if it also didn't hold meaning for him on a certain level. That could be it, or it could be simply that after my mother died, my father was in a bit of a panic because he had 6 children, and he had lost the glue for his family. And he entered into a hasty marriage with a member of the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod, because he had been taught that was the #1 criterion for choosing a mate, member of the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod. And it turned out to be just a terrible decision, a terrible mistake. He was in a miserable marriage. And after that, when he met Alice, who he was with when I converted, I think he was ready. She wanted to go a different path. He was ready to let it go. So. Yes.
How old were you when your mother died?
I was 10, but she'd been sick my whole life, kind of in and out of remission, and so, yes.
Well, why did you choose reform instead of reconstruction? Where that led you after reform?
You know, it's a good question, because I think very much like a Reconstructionist, because of my early exposure to it. It really was a practical reason. When I moved back to New York with my former husband, we moved back to take care of his mother. The Reformed Seminary was closer. We couldn't relocate to Philadelphia, where the Reconstructionist Rabbinical College is. I had also considered the conservative movement, because I really loved the rigor of the education. And there was a conservative rabbi I was working with who was helping me with my biblical Hebrew, and he encouraged me to apply to the conservative seminary, and said, we need more women, you know, your presence would be really important. But then he told me that my son would have to undergo a formal conversion, because my son was born before I converted and is considered Jewish by Reform and Reconstructionist Judaism, because he has a Jewish father and he's been raised as a Jew. But I hadn't converted when he was born, so this conservative rabbi said, well, your son will have to undergo a conversion. And not just, you know, a dunk in the mikvah, which would be fine with me, but undergo a kind of, it's a symbolic brit milah, a symbolic second circumcision. You'd have to have drops of blood drawn, you know, from his foreskin. So I said, all due respect, there is nothing that I could think that would turn my 9-year-old son away from Judaism more than having that procedure done. And the rabbi said, well, I don't think that you would be admitted to the conservative movement without it. And I said, well, then I guess I wasn't meant to be a conservative rabbi. I happen to feel very fortunate in that to serve the congregation I serve, because we do kind of embrace different ways of thinking, and we've done some more experimentation with ritual. I think that's the trend of the Reform movement in general too. And my current and last husband was raised as a yeshiva education, ordained as a conservative rabbi, and then went to get a PhD in Semitics, the ancient languages that make up Hebrew. So he's an academic, but he's a great source of information for me. And so I feel like I have the benefits of access to really great text study and learning that a conservative education might have given me. At the same time, I work in a synagogue that has the freedom to really experiment and to keep religion growing and vital, and because Reform movement doesn't claim to be a halachic movement, a movement bound to Jewish law. So I have the best of all worlds, I think. Yes?
You mentioned you recommend sticking with core values as the path for synagogues today. What would you consider the core values to be?
I think our rabbis stated it very succinctly 2,000 years ago when they said, Al shlosha devarim ha'olam omed, the world stands on 3 things. Torah, study, really knowing our sacred texts, what's in our Sefer Torah, and then the generations of interpretation that come after that. Avodah, which is, the time of the rabbis meant like worship, but really is broader. I think it's sacred celebration. And gemilut chasadim, acts of loving kindness. I think those are the 3 pillars of a sacred community. And you can't emphasize one to the exclusion of others, I don't think.
I was wondering, how many generations were in this country prior to your parents, your family?
Oh, in my country?
In America.
On my father's side, actually my grandmother came to this country as a young girl, as a 9-year-old, because she was living in Germany. Her father was an artist, didn't have money. He eventually died. The German economy was terrible. It was in the aftermath of World War I. And her mother sent her to America to live with relatives as a 9-year-old. She didn't see her mother for 42 years after that. My father's family came over with my great-grandfather's generation. And I know less about my mother's side. They also come from Germany, Schmidt, and I'm not sure when they came. I think for a long time they were in North Dakota, farming in North Dakota. My mother was born on a farm in North Dakota, so I'm not sure about how long they've been here. They weren't recent immigrants except for my grandmother, my paternal grandmother. I know.
Do you think that your path might have not happened so clearly or so soon had you not come back to Croton and execute one and had Rabbi Jaech, as you mentioned?
Can you repeat that question?
Oh.
We can't understand what you...
I think.
Repeat the question.
Rabbi Jaech came back from Washington to New York because she said she was helping her husband take care of his mother. And I don't know if it was your first job here, but you came to work at Temple Israel.
Yes.
Where we had another woman rabbi, somewhat of a groundbreaker also, one of the early classes.
Yes, I did.
And
Yeah.
I'm just wondering, how much that helped your choice, or made it easier for you to choose the path that you did.
Yeah, I didn't, yeah.
Like luck.
Yeah, I didn't elaborate too much about that. When we moved back to New York to take care of my, after I had that moment where I projected myself 10 years into the future and I thought, well, I could be a bureaucrat, state bureaucrat, or I could do something else. We moved back to take care of my former mother-in-law, but I had also in the back of my mind known that if I wanted to really be serious about pursuing the rabbinate, I needed to be in New York. And I really liked the rabbi who was then at Temple Israel. So we moved back, and I told you, I think, that it took me a lot of years to work up the nerve, the courage, to apply to rabbinic school. And one of the things I really wanted to know was, is this what I want to do? Because I would be uprooting my family and going to live in Israel for a year. That was a requirement of the program. And I wanted to make sure that this was really what I wanted to do. If I was going to go into debt, take out student loans, and take my young son to Israel, I needed to know it was the right thing. So I happened to, when I came back to New York, there was a position that opened in the office, kind of the administrative assistant to the rabbi, and I applied for it and I got the position. And that was a great place to be because everything important that happens in a synagogue comes through the office. So I really had a great sense of how a synagogue works, the politics of a synagogue, and I got to see the work of a rabbi really close up because I was working with the rabbi on a daily basis. Had I not had that experience, maybe I wouldn't have had the courage to turn my life upside down and do this. Had Rabbi Ferris, who was then the rabbi, been less than enthusiastic in supporting my becoming a rabbi, that might have also thrown me off track because it was a tenuous track. I really had no reason to believe that I could succeed at this. So I'm fortunate that I had that experience.
In addition to your story of changing religion, I find it very interesting that you were a member who chose to go into the rabbinate. That journey into itself, I think, is rather unusual because you were then with a family, and there's a tremendous amount of sacrifice going into a new profession, let alone learning a new profession, let alone everything else. Can you sort of go through your journey in that area?
I wonder how uncommon it is. I know I hear it happening more and more, these midlife course corrections. But I guess it does take some courage. There are a number of attorneys, former attorneys in my rabbinical class, so I know I wasn't the only one to do this. But I guess what enabled me to do it was that I thought that, well, first of all, I felt such passion in my heart. I mean, I really felt, and I felt it physically. Like I couldn't imagine not pursuing this path in a way when I really allowed myself to be honest with myself. But then I thought, you know, in terms of what I would be putting my family through, I thought it's really good for children, and I have one son, to see their parents try something new, be beginners at something, and be happy and fulfilled in what they do rather than having regrets about what they might have done. The finances were worrisome. I'm not going to lie about that. I worried about giving up a professional career track to be a student for 5 years again. But I have one brother who is affluent and was able to help me somewhat. I took out student loans. I made it work. And I think it was really good for my relationship with my son, because the two of us came to Israel initially together, and we really got very close in Israel. And I always remember that the first day that I had class, it was during the summer, it was a total immersion in Hebrew. The summer program was devoted to language acquisition. The teacher spoke only in Hebrew. For some reason, I had tested into a higher level class because I'm very good at reading and writing, but not so good at hearing. And but I tested on paper into a high level class. That first day, I didn't understand a word of what was going on. I came home. I was sure that my career was over. I burst into tears in front of my son, and my 9-year-old son said, "Mom, don't worry, I know you can do it." And so that's things like that help me keep going. Did I answer enough?
Yeah, I mean, I've seen this happen with various people who have tried to become rabbis at an older age, 25 to 30 years old, 30 and 35. They don't make it because the outside forces related to their life sort of interfere. Whereas if you're younger in your early 20s, without interference, you know, it's easier to do.
Well, I had the benefit of having more older, about 30% of us in my class were second career students. I was 35 when I entered rabbinic school, so kind of on the cusp. A good time really to make a change. I was most concerned about my son, and he paid for my being a student, and that we lived pretty sparsely for a while. I guess in a way I couldn't imagine not pursuing the path I felt so strongly, and that. Yes. Oh, you.
I was very snotty about it. Developed as a Jew. Is he enthusiastic?
The question was about my son and his development as a Jew. He feels a very strong connection to Jewish community and to Israel because of our years there. He feels very connected to that. And but he's not, and he tells me, he's not so religious. He himself might. He's very attracted to East Asian religions, and he himself might go in a different direction than I go. But I know that he feels a strong sense of Jewish identity and connection to the Jewish people. He's in college now, so it's hard to tell with college kids where they're going to go. I don't know where he's going to end up. I hope, because I care about Judaism and the Jewish people and I want him to always be a part of it, I hope that it's with us. But I've done the best I can do, and now it's up to him.
One last question.
Sure.
Do you feel that your political experience helped you be a rabbi?
How many people have worked in synagogues and know the politics of our... Yes, absolutely. Because politics is really about working with people, imagining possibilities, getting people together to achieve a goal, and that's really what synagogue life is about too, and one of its... That's how you get things done in a synagogue. Yes. Any other questions? Oh, I...
What about, because we're talking to Jewish historical society, people who intermarry and how we approach the non-Jewish spouse about becoming part of the Jewish faith?
I am greatly influenced by my own experience in terms of I came to Judaism through an intermarriage, and so I think that I'm in the minority of Reform rabbis. I will officiate at a Jewish wedding if one member has not converted, but the intention is to establish a Jewish home. I will do that because to do otherwise seems hypocritical to me, given my own experience. I do have limits. I won't co-officiate or try to do a wedding that incorporates Christian and Jewish traditions because I believe that each religion has its own integrity, and I don't try to combine them. But I'm also so mindful of my first experience approaching a rabbi early on in my journey as a non-Jewish intermarried person, and the welcoming that she gave me. She really took me seriously. She wanted to support me and help me along my own path, and that's what I try to do. Try to replicate that in my own work.
Can't hear you. Be very loud. Loud as you can.
One of my children, my daughter, intermarried. Her husband's family are Lutheran. When she had children, her first child was a daughter and there was no question. Her second child was a son, and her mother-in-law wanted the baby to be baptized. Well, that's all I had to hear. I'm going to tell you my reaction, but hers was no different than mine. I wanted him to be circumcised. Fortunately, we won out, if you want to call it that. But her belief was that if he was not baptized when he died, he would go straight to hell.
Absolutely.
Now, is that still, they still feel that way?
That's,
I never heard that.
I can't speak for, okay, so the question was about, I guess, the Lutheran view of infants who are not baptized, because in the case of an intermarriage, sometimes you have families, the Christian family members who really believe that unless the child is baptized, the child is going to go to hell. Not, again, I cannot speak to all Lutherans, but that is what I was taught growing up, was that the human state is one of sin, and baptism lifts the sin from you, and even if you are 3 days old and you've had no chance to sin, you are a sinful creature, and without baptism you'll go to hell. And that's why it's so tricky to navigate these interfaith issues, especially when there are family members who feel so strongly a certain way. And the best I can talk, couples who come to see me know my policy, so they've already made the decision about a Jewish family, but I worry about families, about couples who get together. They say, well, we'll worry about the kids when it's time to have kids. Our love will get us through. It's so much better to just work it out at the very beginning, if you can do that, so that there's no question.
Fortunately, that issue had never come up. I guess my daughter had never heard of that, and her children are, since she's Jewish, are automatically Jewish, and my son-in-law didn't care. So they are very definitely Jewish, and, you know, been raised in the Jewish faith.
Right.
I think my mother-in-law, once she came to her grandson's bar mitzvah, she was so thrilled when she saw them walking down with the Torah. She had never seen anything like that before. She looked upon Jewish people in a different light, and I was very happy that happened.
I hope that the theology is becoming more flexible, because it's hard to imagine.
Is it fair to say the Lutheran Church is the majority church in Germany?
Oh, I'm not enough of an expert to be able to say that, but Luther certainly got his start.
And your statement that merely recanting the last day of your life forgives you of all your sins, would it be the Church's position that those who took part in the Sholom would be forgiven?
You know, I do not know the answer to that. And now you've prompted me to go and look it up. As a child, I'm giving you a child's understanding. Yeah, I think that they would say yes. A Nazi who commits murder, if the Nazi believes the right way on his deathbed, he gets into heaven. And again, that went so strongly against my own sense of justice that I just could not live with that. Yes.
You talked a lot about, as a child, your feeling of the unfairness of the, some of the views of the religion. What were your childhood beliefs and feelings about Jesus himself, as separate from the religious feelings.
The question, I talked about my childhood feelings about religion, but the question was, how did I feel about Jesus? The good thing, I think one of the good things is, at least with Jesus, we were taught Jesus was kind of a loving figure, a figure all kids could come to. There are pictures up in our church of Jesus sitting down with kids of all colors, on his lap and around him. So Jesus was presented as a loving figure, but that, I couldn't quite reconcile that with, the fact that Jesus would let the Nazi into heaven and make the good Hindu go to hell. So again, that just didn't work for me. So, if you have anything that you'd like to say to me or ask me on our way out, I'll be happy to speak with you, but I think I need to let you go. I do thank you so much for